Oh, there. I know, right?
The magic voice.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and it is Thursday, April 3rd. And we are joined by Secretary Moore again. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. And just to kick us off or frame this up a little bit. So there we received an email about dam safety rules that I believe came from Act 161, or they were supposed to come as a result of Act 161. And so thinking about how, when those were due, the second set of rules was required to be adopted July 1st of 2022. And they, as I understand it, have not been done yet. And so we would love to know what's the story, where are they at, how can we help make those happen?
Great. I appreciate your interest. I put together a few slides. Hopefully, we can go to presentation. All right. Together a few slides to just talk about kind of current status of the rules themselves, but also the other really significant bodies work that the dam safety program, the small but mighty dam safety program in ANR is engaged in. So, as you noted, Act 161 was passed in 2018, and it really was intended to address gaps in what at that time were the dam safety regulations. But I think it's important to note it did not provide additional capacity to the dam safety program. 2 years ago now, Act 121 was passed, which is the Flood Safety Act. It did add some technical positions to the dam safety program, but it also gave the program a set of new responsibilities and really didn't therefore address the capacity challenges that have been created by Act 161. At the same time, we had a lot of things going on in the dam safety space. So the flooding in 23 and 24 probably sits at least front of mind for me. Following the flood events in 2023, our team actually worked with folks that we received emergency management assistance from a couple of neighboring jurisdictions and visited every significant and high hazard dam in the state to look for signs of damage. But in addition, we've had several dam failures that have taken place during this time and some emergency repairs that our team provides sort of technical assistance and oversight for. And then what I didn't list on the slide is the other bodies of work they're engaged in. We have the dam and dike study for Green River Reservoir, which should be completed later this year. There is a major rehabilitation project that's underway at the Waterbury Reservoir. We anticipate that'll go to construction maybe as soon as 27, but that's somewhere between a $70 and $90 million rehabilitation project, and the team has been doing a lot of work to prepare for that, partnering with the Army Corps to answer technical questions, and even doing some modest interim repairs where some critical deficiencies were identified, as well as trying to get our own portfolio of ANR dams up to snuff, consistent with what we are asking private dam owners to do in the state. In addition to those three major flood control facilities at Wrightsville, Waterbury, and Berry, ANR owns nearly 100 dams across FPR, Fish and Wildlife, and to a much lesser extent, DEC. So it's a very long lead up to the final bullet on that slide, which is we have been working actively as leadership, myself and Commissioner Batchelder, to help the program prioritize its workload in light of the available resources. So just to go a little bit deeper into what Act 121 had required, it's looking to transfer regulatory authority for about 20 dams from the Public Utilities Commission to DEC. It's created this unsafe dam revolving fund, and we've actually had our first usage of it this winter to, I think, work on a dam in Stowe. There's some new reporting requirements and a legislative study committee that has gotten underway. As part of Act 121, we did testify the agency needed 18 positions to fully implement the scope of that bill. As you'll recall, it's not just dam safety, it also included work around river corridor and floodplain regulation, and some enhanced wetlands protections. Of the 18 positions we had identified as necessary for that bill, 6 were in the dam safety program, and then a financial administrator position, which is really to run the revolving loan fund. As passed, Act 121 had 15 positions contained in it, so 5 technical positions for the dam safety program and 1 financial administrator. But the funding in the big bill last year only was sufficient to hire 11. And so again, Commissioner Batchelder and I worked together to figure out how to take those 11 positions and spread them across the body of work required by Act 121. In the end, we placed 4 positions in the dam safety program, or prioritized hiring for 4 of the positions in the dam safety program and that financial administrator position to help run the revolving loan fund. To date, 2 of those 4 technical positions have been filled. I'll just put an asterisk here. Engineering positions in state government. I mean, I think engineering positions in Vermont are challenging to fill. Engineering positions in state government are incredibly challenging to fill because we just don't pay competitive salaries to what engineers can command in the private sector. The fact that we filled 2 of those positions is great, but that's also another sort of drain on dam safety program staff time. In terms of the technical standards rule, which was slated for adoption, I had July 1st of 2025 as opposed to 24, but we're not at the point in the process we would need to be for that to be realistic. We're more realistically looking at probably July 20 of 2026. Up top, I've listed kind of the core components of what's in that technical standards rule. This is sort of phase 2 of our overall more rigorous structure for regulating dams. The team is nearing completion of drafting the rule, but then we've got a whole set of review processes. There's internal review within A&R. There's a strong interest in doing pre-rulemaking stakeholder engagement, in part because this will have very significant implications for many private dam owners in the state of Vermont, and we want to make sure they are aware. As well as doing some peer review, because this is a very technical undertaking. Then we get into more of the formal rulemaking process with formal public meetings, as well as those filings with ICAR and LCAR. One other component is with this somewhat slower schedule, it does allow for somewhat better alignment with the revolving loan fund rules. And so just want to remind folks what's happening in that space. We're creating a framework that will offer low cost or no cost loans to dam owners to make emergency and non-emergency repairs. The General Assembly capitalized that fund with about $4 million. And we can use it sort of for every facet of these dam rehabilitation projects, from design and planning to construction. And we are working on sort of what the terms and conditions are, so to speak, how we're going to prioritize that work, what our expectations are, and frankly, how much subsidy different types of projects are going to qualify for, because we know there is significantly more need out there than $4 million. That work remains on track, and we anticipate having that rule in place by July 1st of 27. So that's really it. My hope in being able to share all of that with you is Ben Green is doing exactly what Commissioner Batchelder and I have asked him to do. And he is doing, frankly, yeoman's work, but in a manner that's consistent with the priorities we have identified for him. I know it doesn't match exactly all of the timelines and statute, but that's on me as opposed to the program, which is doing everything they can within their existing capacity to advance dam safety in the state.
Yes.
So the revolving loan fund, isn't going to be ready until July of 27.
We have done at least one project using some of those resources in an emergency capacity. But for the full set of sort of operating criteria will be established in about July 1st, 27. It doesn't mean we can't tap those resources now as critical needs arise. can actually bear with me for 1 second. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can go into my email and can bring up the note Ben sent me this morning about the one project that was done. Hold on, that's the wrong email.
It's okay.
Sorry. Oh, it was there was a failed private dam in Randolph, and we did tap the unsafe dams revolving fund to help address the remediate the
Just
situation.
to remove or,
That, it doesn't say that here, I believe it was to remove as opposed to repair, but I can get back to you with that.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so it sounds like there are multiple rules. There's the dam safety revolving loan fund rules, and then there's the dam safety rules.
Phase 2 of the dam.
Phase 2, okay, and then is there a third one that you just
Well,
mentioned?
we've already done phase 1.
You did phase 1, so it's phase 2 that was supposed to have been done by
July.
July 1st of this year. And you think it'll be July 1st of 26?
Yes,
And then the revolving loan fund rules were supposed to be 26, and you think they'll be
so
27?
I think they were supposed to be.
They were supposed to be 27, okay.
But having the phase 2 rules come later allows for better alignment with the dam safety revolving loan fund rules.
Okay. And the dam safety rules. It doesn't mean, without the rules, it doesn't mean you can't. This sounds silly, but it doesn't mean you can't do things to keep dams safe or to make them safer. It's just a matter of getting it codified, or codified in rule, how the program itself works.
Correct. Well, what we don't have is the full ability to compel actions in non-emergency
I
situations.
see, okay. Of
Yeah.
others, you can still do it here too, you compel yourself.
Correct, and that's part of why, you know, from my perspective, it's really hard to tell Vermonters we're holding them to a standard we haven't held ourselves to. And so getting our own portfolio, I mean, we own somewhere more upwards of 10% of all the dams in the state, right? We need to get our house in order too.
Mhm.
And so that work needs to be moving in lockstep with what we're doing in terms of developing rules and readying those for implementation.
Mhm.
So the revolving loan fund rules, are they, actually, I want to back up further from that. So if you were to have the phase 2 rules done, then you could compel the dam owners to follow those rules.
Correct.
And presumably baked into those rules would be some kind of, I'm not sure the right word is consequences, but something like, here's what you gotta do. And if not, there's some kind of enforcement, is that?
Yes, and part of the challenge has been, these repairs tend to be very expensive. Often, landowners have indicated they have limited means. They can be difficult to receive private financing for, which was part of creating that revolving loan fund. I believe the dam safety program indicated they thought ultimately probably needs to be capitalized at the level of about $20 million. So this is a start. But there is far more need out there than those dollars will allow them to address. That said, it's a significant step forward, and historically we haven't had any resources, and sort of you end up in this can't get blood from a stone situation
Mhm.
where there are clear needs and no tools available to people who do not have the means sort of in their own bank account to address. We do use those opportunities to try to connect people where it makes sense with dam removal opportunities. There's significant funding that's been available the last several years through the Lake Champlain Basin Program, with the bipartisan infrastructure law to help with that work. We have resources we are sometimes able to bring to bear in different accounts, particularly in fish and wildlife, but also our clean water monies. So trying to help piece it together, but these are going to be important tools in that overall toolbox. And just want to offer my assurance, we take this work incredibly seriously. It is that there is a lot of it.
And so just to back up stuff, you mentioned that the authority was created for 15 positions, but you had funding for 11. 4 of those were in the dam safety program. And not all of those positions, not all of those new positions are filled.
Correct.
And so can you just say how many of those positions are filled?
Two.
Two, so we're missing two people
Correct.
and,
Two engineers, I should say, I don't know the status of the financial administrator position. But I anticipate that one may not be as challenging as the engineering positions to fill.
sure, and I presumably it's the engineers that'll be involved in writing the dam safety rules anyway.
Correct, it's the small team that's doing all of these tests, right?
right.
From the very deeply technical engineering review in the field to some of the procedural and policy work, as well as reviewing consultant reports related to Waterbury and Green River reservoirs. Those things are being produced.
And do you anticipate that if so you mentioned that you think that this phase two may be done July of next year. Is that if those positions are filled, or is that if?
I was anticipating we'll find qualified candidates for those remaining two positions. My understanding is they've gone out for recruitment once and closed with no qualified applicants, and so we'll go back out again.
And when do you think you'll do that?
They may, I can confirm, they may actually be posted now.
Okay. And so, and just backing up with staff, because the deadline for these roles was postponed,
It was
and can you tell me about why that was at that point?
largely due to resources and our ability to effectively engage with Vermonters. I think the program has concerns that these are significant changes and really will place very real liabilities on private dam owners, and this need to make sure that they're sort of aware. And the first phase sets up some of that more routine inspection and expectations before we get to kind of the full-throated regulation and potential enforcement or mandates to make repairs.
Right. So getting this phase two done has potentially financial implications for people.
Yes,
Right.
correct.
Okay. Yes.
So we probably haven't identified all the man-made dams, have we?
I think we're focused on the high hazard and significant hazard dams, and in that instance, I believe we have. Because I agree, there are probably innumerable low head dams out there that we don't actually
Right.
think exist.
So if I had one on my property, maybe it was weakened, is there any way that we can convey that to the landowner that, you know, this is on the map and it may be a problem? So what's the procedure if they want to do it themselves?
To remove it,
Right. If-
so it generally requires a stream alteration permit from the agency, so an engineer would go out and review and provide advice. There's some seasonal restrictions because you don't want to be digging in the river during sort of fish spawning season and other concerns along those lines. Depending on the amount of sediment backed up behind the dam, there may be other obligations or requirements to fulfill. These projects tend to be complicated,
Right.
but also oftentimes are far lower cost than what it would take to repair the dam.
I've worked with Josh Carl down in Rutland District.
Yeah.
He's really good at that, so. But we also had a beaver dam in the springtime. The small beaver get booted out of the pond and they go back upstream and they build their own dam. And Route 31, I think it was about 15 years ago, was washed out because the main dam broke. So you're gonna get 5 dams and those may not even be on, so.
I'm confident we do not have anything approaching an inventory of significant beaver dams on the landscape.
Do you do it with aerial photographs or anything?
I think right now, we mostly, the places we focus on are where somebody reports a conflict, right? Beavers have created a dam and it's backwater up into my property, it's over my driveway, it's over V-Trans State Highway, and those are the projects we get involved in. But we have like 1.5 staff that work on that stuff, so not a lot of capacity to be proactive, or mostly being reactive.
Good things.
Any other conditions? That's not quite the right phrase. Just want to say, hoping that these rules can be done as fast as we can, reasonably can,
Yes.
since it is a public safety issue, and recognizing that it may present some costs, but we do have this revolving loan fund as a backstop, and maybe we should think about capitalizing that at a higher rate. But thank you for all the work that you are doing in this area. Any other questions for Secretary Moore?
No.
Okay. So something, well, just to say it out loud too, we all hope that we don't have any more significant flooding events this summer. That would obviously keep your busy there. But even so, this is also, it's like trying to play catch up so that we can get to a place where the dams are less of a concern, rather there's some analogy in there that's I'm not quite getting. It's like we gotta stop the bleeding somehow, right? Like we've gotta bring down the risk. And part of that is getting these rules in place and getting them to so that we can shore them up. Yeah.
So, and we, in kind of looking at the portfolio of work in our space, pushed really hard, knowing that Waterbury Reservoir Dam project is sort of currently scheduled for 27, but that's gonna take staff time, technical resources from the dam safety program. And so really wanna get all of the rulemaking pieces put to bed before we need to pivot some of our staff to focus on that rehabilitation.
Is that the one that you mentioned? Well, there was one that you said was like $70 to $90 million. Was that
That is the Waterbury Dam project.
Waterbury? Yeah.
We don't have all of that money yet. The state has set aside matching funds for what is currently available from the Corps, which I think is north of $40 million, but clearly not enough to get us all the way there. So we've been working with the congressional delegation to identify additional funding.
Okay, good. Yes, go ahead.
Just to say, to the extent we can, every time we remove a dam, it's a huge environmental victory as well. So we ought to, I know we've got more to do just in dam safety than we can do, but also using money and encouraging people to take out dams that aren't, I mean, not to say necessary, I don't know what really is necessary, but my guess is we've got a hell of a lot of dams that would be much better off getting out of the rivers altogether. And
We did.
trying to focus on that as well. I know you are, but I just have to say it, so.
No, I'm trying to make sure we're doing it in a thoughtful way that maximizes the habitat benefits, right? Taking out a dam in one location and we have other structures upstream and downstream that prohibit aquatic organism passage isn't as helpful as going after the most downstream feature first. We did have a very successful dam removal project in Rutland, right on its end. That both opened up a significant amount of street miles and addressed some really critical flooding concerns for a couple of adjoining property owners. That was completed maybe 18 months ago. It was a really nice project.
Yeah,
This is not totally just interested, not in being we're talking about this, but is the dam on Bombazine, is Bombazine there partly because of the dam? So it's really, it's that much made by us, like it's
Expanded by this,
Okay.
right? And I think that's one of the challenges in a lot of these spaces is you have a privately owned dam that is providing a fairly substantial recreational resource to many property owners. So you have one or two people who have the liability for something many more enjoy. And in some instances, certainly have found property owners that weren't aware they were certainly responsible for the dam.
Same concept investment too.
yeah, that's really good. I had never really thought about Bombazine as being.
Yeah.
But it is, okay.
Yeah, no, so we did have to do emergency repair work there a couple of years ago.
Also Lake Sunrise, where you went to Boy Scout camp.
What's that?
That is also because of a private dam, yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
This one of your slides, Julie, you said you were transferring want to transfer 20 dams from the PUC to DEC. Are those
That's what
all,
we wanted to transfer,
okay,
but the PUC wanted to transfer.
are all 20 of those, are they non-generators?
They are non-FERC licensed dams, but I think they have, some of them have generation capacity, they just haven't risen to the level of being regulated by FERC.
Okay.
One of the things we intend to do is several of them, the team believes should be regulated by FERC, and we're gonna try to turn them over to them
Okay,
before we take over the responsibility.
Pass it.
You said regulated by first,
What's the timeline on that?
I don't
We
know,
don't
but I
have
know that too.
Separate issue. Okay, well, looking forward to seeing that progress and we'll hope for the best for hiring and but in the meanwhile, you know, thinking about that this it really ideally would be done before you're pivoting your attention to the Waterbury Dam. Could be, so, yeah, let's check in about this again.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back next year and provide an update, and as I say, I just wanted to make clear, this is Jason and I providing direction to Ben.
Yes.
Based on the capacity, has not any decisions Ben's making, you
No,
know.
for sure. Please pass along to him that we're so grateful for all the things that he is doing. So very grateful for his work. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Okay, all right, so we are gonna pivot ourselves here to S-124. We've got our ledge council. Welcome. We've got a new draft of S-124 based on the conversation that we had yesterday. And I mean, we'll go through it, see if there's anything we,
Copies.
it should be on there.
This is it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, just for context, it's based on the recommendations we got from Secretary Moore yesterday, keeping waters of the state, as well as, well, we had a flag next to stakeholder group, so, okay.
Okay, this is Mike O'Grady with the Senate Council, and I'll talk through draft number 1.1, S-124, with the 4-2 date and the 3/40/15 timestamp. Should I just walk through the changes?
Yes.
So the first change is on page 5. It's lines 5 through 8. This is in the Agency of Agriculture's water quality authority related to minimum vegetative buffers. It's really a technical amendment that had previously said to be a concentrated animal feeding operation, as that term is defined in 10 BSA 1351. There's a request to change it to be a concentrated animal feeding operation and is required to obtain a CAPO permit as required under 10 BSA 1353. And then there was new language on page 5, line 8 that was added. The term to be a concentrated animal feeding operation that require a CAPO permit. So that is the first change. The second change is on page 6. There had been a requirement that the Agency of Agriculture immediately respond and refer a potential discharge to the Secretary of Natural Resources. Immediately was replaced with promptly. I believe that was an EPA change. So no, guess I was
Just a legal difference to fall.
well immediately. It's like
yeah, or maybe.
Making the call.
so that was changed promptly. And
That's a
that
good question, though. Is there like a 24-hour, like, what's, anyway, okay.
and that then on page 12. In the language about medium farm operation permits. At the Agency of Agriculture, first highlighting is on page 12, line 17. where the language that had been provided by the agency would have changed waters of the state to waters of the United States, but you has indicated not to do that. And I don't think it's necessary to do that because in Title 10, 1251, you amend in this draft the definition of waters to include waters of the United States. And then you're still in Title 6 here, and so, but the Title 6 definition of water cross-references the Title 10 definition of water, so you don't need to make the change in Title 6 because you're making it in Title 10 and incorporating it under that section there.
Perfect.
On page 13.
So just to make sure I'm
Yep.
clear about this. So we're in every instance here. We're only going to refer to waters of the state because it includes by definition waters of the United States.
Yes.
It's broader and more comprehensive. And so we're going with the more comprehensive across the board.
You are going. Theoretically, waters of the United States is encompassed under the definition of waters as the state defines it, but to be clear for EPA's purposes and regulatory authority, you're clearly calling that, well, I wouldn't say clearly. Normally, we would cite the statute or the rule that defines what waters of the United States is. We don't know what that's going to be, because it is changing again for the fourth time in 5 years, and so. As proposed by the language yesterday, it just says waters of the United States as defined under the Clean Water Act, which I think is fine for the purposes of this. Once we know what the true site is, we'll probably add that over there.
Yes, good.
Tiny Michael, so, but you added promptly in 2 places.
Yeah,
And
3 places.
in 3 places. In the second play time, you did shall promptly,
Yes.
and the first time you did promptly shall. I know it probably doesn't make a difference, but can we do shall promptly?
You can, we ever rule against splitting the infinitive unless it makes the reading of the language difficult.
Okay,
So
this was sticking with
so
your,
I retain this. The editors wanted to retain the non-split infinitive in the previous one.
oh, really? So you agree with me, it should.
I'm fine with, I'm fine with or not. I'm fine with splitting the infinitive, that's fine.
Okay, shall promptly sounds better.
That's fine.
You're all mocking me, but. No.
I don't know if any of you remember Tom Koch, the rep from Barry. Whenever there was a split infinitive in the bill, he would get up and make a war amendment.
So does that mean that on page 6, we're changing it to shall promptly? Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
I support it.
Moving on to page 14. At the bottom of the page. Again, we still need to see the agriculture's authority on MFOs. And it's retaining waters of the state and saying shall promptly.
Nice.
And then on page 15, there's another promptly change, and it again says shall promptly.
3 out of 4.
Good catch.
Oh, it's gotta be consistent.
So that allows you to move to page 19. You're in the definition sections for Title 10, Chapter 47, which is A&R's Water Quality Authority. You will see in the definition of waters, it now says waters or waters of the state, and it now includes waters of the United States. The set of terms defined under the Federal Clean Water Act, and we just discussed that. I would like to have a citation there, but I don't know what the citation currently will be. And so it's not cited, but it may be in the future. It will be.
is, just as a question about that, if you were to add a reference, a citation here, and it did change, would that make it unapplicable, because now that reference is evaporated?
No, there's a statutory interpretation provision that says once you cite it, it's cited as that substance of the day you cited it.
Mhm.
Unless you put in a language that says as amended from time to time or,
Mhm.
so.
Okay, just curious.
I do have a question on page 19, lines 12 through 20. We generally don't do definitions when the term is not used in the statute. These two definitions, continuous discharge and daily discharge, are not used in the statute. But EPA has proposed that they be included for consistency with the Clean Water Act. I would like to take them out and allow A&R to include them in rules when and if those terms are used. But I didn't want to make that decision on my own.
It's a good question. My gut instinct here is to keep them in because the EPA suggested it. And better to not run contrary to their recommendation, but so is you're thinking that the definitions may change and that would be easier to change rule.
Well, we just don't use the term substantively. It's
Yeah.
just defined, but it's never used anywhere else in statute. So.
I'm open to suggestions.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
If we pass this and then we go through rulemaking, when is EPA gonna come in and like go through everything and fine tooth comb and make sure will they do that after we pass the bill or will they do that after we get to a rulemaking?
But EPA, to my understanding, has already gone through this version.
Okay.
When they go through rules. I mean, if they're gonna amend the water quality standards in their rules, which they may have their own rule for CAFOs. EPA is gonna wanna look at that as part of the corrective action that they're requiring, statutory and regulatory change, so they will look at that. And if the agency is gonna amend water quality standards, EPA has to approve them. So EPA is gonna be involved at some point in that process.
And they'll look at this whole thing holistically, I guess, at the end and
Well, I mean, I do think that they're going to approve the corrective action plan that A&R has provided now. Because they asked for more detail and A&R gave them a 4-year plan, a little bit 4 years. And so they're gonna say that's good, and they're gonna monitor completion of that plan.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the question.
Do you mind if I ask? You're right behind me, yes, so what do you have an opinion on this, whether we should keep it in or take it out?
Catherine Getzing, General Counsel with Fish and Wildlife, need some more coffee. I understand what Mike is saying, and I do think there's an opportunity for us to put those terms in rules when we're and because the CAFO permit, the CAFO rules are going to be more detailed and explicit, and so I don't know that that's a linchpin for EPA, because they really did focus more on the definitions related to CAFOs and they have definitely expressed interest in looking at the CAFO rules and working with us on the CAFO rules when we get to that. So they are going to be looking.
Okay.
And giving us the.
So one thought could be, if we take these definitions out, perhaps we could replace it with some language that says to the effect, like in rulemaking, rules will be adopted to define these terms in alignment with federal definitions. So we don't have to define them, but just ensure that that happens. Yeah, but.
I think that, I mean, I never think, I always think, I agree with Mike, we shouldn't have things in statute that we don't use, because it confuses people. And if there was some kind of challenge brought to somebody's CAFO permit, and these were in statute, it might confuse things. And I don't think we need to say what you just said, because I think that when they go through rulemaking, they'll define everything that they need to define, that's sort of what is required, is to make sure that everything that's relevant to a permit is defined in rule. So
You think it's gonna happen?
I think it's gonna happen anyway, and I think keeping this clean is helpful.
So really,
It's a process question, so what would it take to put those terms in the statute?
What you're doing right now.
Okay,
And then, but then you would have to use them. For them to have any relevance, but I mean, I don't know where you would use them. And I think I can know where you would use them, but if they're not currently used. So I don't really have a preference, I'm just, our manual says don't define terms that aren't used. And so I'm doing that, but you are the ultimate decision maker, you can decide that these terms should be there because the EPA preference.
so
Out
Ron,
of curiosity. If they're not using the statute, why are they supposed to be included?
It would be because EPA wants greater consistency with, between Vermont statute and the Clean Water Act.
Okay. Well, I, in the end, I think it would be, come down to everybody's side of this is the part about it being confusing for people, to have something there that is just untethered from anything is confusing, which is probably why you have that in the manual. So maybe we should just.
Senator Beth, any opinion? I'm also open, so if it sounds like the consensus is that we should strike that since it's not used. And besides, we may be coming back to this anyway, right? We'll be revisiting it, so if it turns out that we need it, we can always.
Yeah.
So there is a new definition of direct discharge on page 20, it is used in statute. So that would provide a consistency between the Vermont statute and the Clean Water Act.
Are you gonna now have to renumber?
Yeah, we have to renumber. Moving on from there, the next page is on page 22. This is in the definition of large CAFO. You were having discussions the last time I was in about how this definition was structured, because it had the reverse nose arc list, but then it had 3 criteria that the agency could select in order to determine that the farm needed a large CAFO permit. There was discussion about how it shouldn't be in that definition. It's been moved out of the definition, it's been moved to a discharge standard or such authority in 10 VSA 1263 in section 11 on page 36. It's the same criteria, it's just not in the definitions, it's in basically an authority of the agency to determine that the permit is required. So,
Thank you.
and then there needed to be some structural changes, page 22. Getting rid of all the subdivisions, I had to make a change on page 22 lots. Page 23, this is in the definition of medium farm permit. This is the criteria for when they are needed a medium CAFO. It had previously said waste or discharge into waters of the state through, but said via a point source. That's not what the Clean Water Act regs say. It's the Clean Water Act regs provide this language that's in front of you on page 23, line 18, through a man-made ditch flushing system or similar man-made device. So for consistency with the Clean Water Act, this language was proposed for change.
Yeah.
Yes, we,
Is. On line 7, should that just be waters? Cause the line 9 is just waters.
It honestly can be either, because as the definition. Actually, it should say waters, it should just say waters.
okay.
Moving on from there, page 25. Is the definition of small concentrated animal feeding operation. The state is gray because whoever made the edit in the document from the agency wanted it to be lowercase, and that needs to be uppercase, and I just wanted to highlight that. And is defined by as a CAFO by the regulations adopted under the Federal Clean Water Act. So that's when you determine that there's a small CAFO as defined by the regulations adopted under Clean Water. And then waters of the United States shall have the same meaning as defined by the Federal Clean Water Act. Again, I'd love to put a citation there, but I don't know what that will be right now, or what would be correct. So, page 26. This is in the list of the agency's authority over CAFOs or ag water quality. And so the first change is on page 26, line 4 and 5. It had previously just said designate any AFO that meets the definition of CAFO. But now EPA or the members providing the edits wants to say designate any AFO that meets the definition of a CAFO under the Federal Clean Water Act regulations as a CAFO and Secretary's sole discretion. And then this is language that I had referred to earlier after discussions with Catherine Yesing and Steve Collier. I think having a clear provision that says that the Secretary can require any AFO to obtain a CAFO permit under this chapter on a determination that the AFO is discharging the waters of the state. I think to have that in there clearly. So if there's a small AFO and they can make the determination, or a medium AFO, and maybe it's not complying with its nutrient management plan, and they can make that determination that continued non-compliance is a discharge. That I think that you should give the Secretary that authority. I think it's basically implied throughout the whole program, but there was never that clear statement.
Yeah. Of what's in 5,
Yeah.
right?
So could it just be, is it really a kind of catch-all provision?
It really is. It really is kind of their authority to require an AFO whenever they're discharging to get a permit, regardless if they're large, medium, or small. Should I move on?
Yes.
Now, on page 27, line 1, where it says access private or public property to inspect AFOs. It's now AFOs and CAFOs because they will have that authority. And then on page 27, line 12, you're in the CAFO permit requirements. There needs to be an indent on page 27, line 13, for that new subsection. And then there's language here. This is about when land application of the NOR is going to qualify as a discharge that requires a permit. And I just want to read this language because it's a little, it's just, I just need to read it. So the discharge of manure, litter, or processed wastewater to waters of the state from a permitted CAFO, and the term permitted is new, as a result of the application of that manure, litter, or processed wastewater by the CAFO to land areas control is a discharge from that CAFO subject to NEPT's permit requirement, except where it is an agricultural stormwater discharge provided under the Federal Clean Water Act. So this is if you're land applying, it's a discharge unless it's ag stormwater. And for purposes of a section, manure, litter, or processed wastewater, something's missing right there. The purposes of the subsection, the manure litter or processed wastewater has been applied in accordance with the federal regulations under the Clean Water Act. It's something is missing. The trigger is missing there. So for purposes of the section, the application of the manure, I need to talk to Catherine about how to clarify what they were intending there, because something is just not true enough. So maybe I do that offline, come back to you when you get the new draft with language on that.
Yeah, that would be great,
Okay.
because I see what you're saying.
Did you also on line 15, you read it this way, but it doesn't say there's an on missing. After CAPO on line 15. Has literal. Either CAPO onto the land areas, you read it.
It's just two land areas. I think that result of application of that manure litter processed wastewater by the CAPO to land areas. I don't think it needs to be on.
Okay, you read it as on too,
Okay.
and so I wasn't sure if you
Yeah,
intended it. No, that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just looking at the federal reg, which is what this was based on, and what's missing is that on line 18. After for the purposes of this section, comma, there's a where.
Okay.
And I can just. give-
Okay, that makes sense.
It's just to you, so you.
No, that makes sense.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Moving on from there. There have been some subsections that have been consolidated. There have been a subsection B that was consolidated into subsection A. No substantive change to structure. So you'll see page 28, line 3, where CAPO is highlighted. Nothing really changed there. It's just that's where the structural change was made. And then page 28, line 9, what had been subsection. What happened is a different subdivision was designated in subsection B. So no substantive structural consolidation. And that allows you to go to page 31. You're in the discharge prohibitions. This is clarifying when a required agricultural practice does not require a permit, is provided that introduction of waste are from sources that do not discharge pollutants from point source and comply with the Federal Clean Water Act and the federal CAPO rules. Following activities shall not require a use permit. So that is just clarifying that the RAP are exempt from discharge permit provided that they aren't discharged to food sources. And then on page 32. This is, I have a question here. The secretaries. You need a secretary of natural resources, and that's how secretary is defined in the definitions for this chapter. Shall regulate farms in accordance with federal requirements. I'm wondering if it should be APHOs. Because that's what this whole program is about. It's regulation of APHOs that become CAPOs that have a discharge. I know farms is used in a couple of other places in chapter 47, but it's like in stormwater, but it's not the CAPO permit that's at issue. Or it's when construction general permit, when it's not the CAPO permit that's at issue. So here, where they're regulating APOs, I'm wondering if it should say APO here. And that's a question for you all at the agency.
One question I may lead back to, was Jesse, right? Did that language come from EPA about farms? And
They were most concerned about the delegation language.
Right.
So, I think using AFOs would be okay, with them. I think their concern, their primary concern in making a suggestion to this paragraph was that they wanted it to be clear that A&R didn't have the authority to delegate certain, regulatory actions to.
so that's the farms, we're using the word farm was not their focus.
Yeah, that was not their focus.
Yeah,
It was really the delegation language.
and this is in Title 10.
Okay.
So. My instinct is to change it to AFO, but other opinions?
Okay, all right, and to address Catherine's point about the delegation language is struck. And it just says the Secretary of Ag shall implement the state non-point source pollution control program. Right, it's not anything, A&R cannot delegate any of its entities authority to the agency of Ag. And then on page 32, line 15, to kind of clearly make that distinction, and previously said the shared authority between the two agencies is not shared, it's concurrent authority. They each have their own authority, so shared is changed to concurrent. And then on page 34, this is just language about when the agency can require an applicant to provide additional information. The secretary may require any applicant to submit any additional information before issuing permit application completeness determination. And then the secretary may take appropriate steps to secure compliance, refuse to grant the permit. It's just kind of clarifying when the agency can ask for more information and then when they can take their actions after the permit is issued or applied. Page 35, line 2, there was the word any was missing. It didn't previously been struck and not be reinserted. It's page 30. Page 35, line 18, and previously said the medium CAFO general permit. I think they're just going to issue a CAFO general permit and have different requirements for different years. Page 36, this is where that permitting threshold that had been in the definitions for large CAFO are being moved to the permitting standards. So large CAFO shall not be required to have a CAFO permit unless one of the following: waste or discharge into waters, obviously waters. Waste or directly discharged into waters that originate outside, pass over, go through the facility, or come in contact with the animals. Or there's a precipitation related discharge of manure, litter, etc. That does not in accordance with site specific nutrient management practices. So again, not changing the substance, but just moving it because of the discussion yesterday about where it shouldn't belong in the definitions. Page 37, line 11 and 12, this is in the stormwater exceptions, stormwater runoff from farms. Again, this is a stormwater permit, not the CAFO permit. It is exempt when it is not subject to the Federal Clean Water Act and its enabling regulations. It's the term. It's our fair national source. And that's it.
Hey, super. Yes, go ahead.
I get why we replace waters of the state for any time in water referencing for the United States. What about the way that we sometimes use waters of the state and sometimes use the word water?
The definition is waters or waters of the state. So it really is, they're interchangeable.
So, okay, because sometimes I think it said waters of the state, you should, oh, you said that should say waters. Just wondering.
Where it said waters of the United States.
Yeah, I should have said water.
And we're using the two terms and Because throughout, this is just one subchapter or a couple of different sections of two subchapters. Of a very larger chapter where both terms are used, waters and waters of the state are used throughout. So that's why. We should have had waters or waters of the state previously. And this is. Okay.
So just in terms of next steps on this, so we did get some language from Mr. Carpenter about some suggestions around the stakeholder group. I know you are not on the agenda for this morning, Mr. Carpenter, but if we were able to have time, I'd love for you to yeah, so if you just show us what you've got, it'd be great. We have some changes to be made already to this, and I think we're gonna see you tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm here from 9 till 10 tomorrow.
Okay, so if we can get to a place where we feel good about the stakeholder group language, then I think we're probably ready to vote on it. If we, I mean, I think today is probably too soon, but tomorrow.
Yeah, and I'll just leave whatever you want for the stakeholder language.
Okay, great. Super. So thank you, everybody. We are going to switch gears again. We were lucky enough to get Mr. Johnstone here. Welcome. Thank you from Morrisville Water and Light. Oh,
Can I ask you a
yes.
question?
Yeah, for sure.
When are we gonna hear about this stakeholder?
Well, so I hope we can fit this in today.
Okay.
So that we can be prepared, like, we can make some decisions and then have a new draft.
Are
Thoughts?
Jared's things on our website?
No,
I
I
can't
don't.
open the email,
Okay,
Madam Chair,
yes, yeah.
Chair, Relation Committee, I did forward them to Jude earlier this morning, but
Okay,
I can send them to the committee members if you would like, or others can't see it.
I'm wondering, Jude, can you hear us?
Yes,
Uh,
I'll post it. I wasn't sure. Jared wasn't on the agenda, so I didn't post it.
No, yeah, fair enough. That's fair. So hopefully we can get those suggestions up on the website. And we'll hopefully take that up a little bit later. Actually, we can probably do it. Well, actually, so Michael, you're here for 319 as well?
Yep,
Okay.
but I have to leave at 10:30.
Oh, wait, sorry, you do have to leave at 10:30?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, that may be an opportune time then for Mr. Carpenter to come up, to talk about these changes. Okay. All right, so switching gears, thinking about S319 and particularly this study around the Green River Dam. And the reservoir. So welcome. Do folks need a moment to like transition or get together? Okay. This is your first time here with us, I think.
This year.
This year, fair enough, but it's a new crew here, so let's do a quick round of introductions.
Hi, good morning. I'm Senator Bruce Cody from the Addison District.
Terry Williams from Rutland District.
And Watson, Washington.
Seth Longus from Benton District.
So that comment, yeah.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having me in. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about what should be a pretty non-controversial section, I know, but I'd like to just give you some context for it. And perhaps make a couple small suggestions for you along the way. I'm Scott Johnstone. I'm both the village manager of the village of Morrisville and the general manager of Morrisville Water and Light. All of us are duly chartered municipal utility, municipal entity in Vermont. And on the electric side, which is what we'll be talking about, Green River Reservoir, we serve parts of 6 communities in and around Morrisville. So we kind of cover a lot of that Memorial area, if you will. So around 4,900 customers. We're trying really hard to be focused on the right things at Morrisville. I'm just trying to context set for you a bit, but I don't think it's always been true. And I know that some of the communities have a reputation on that front. So what I would say to you is, long before you passed the new res last year, we already wrote similar things into our integrated resource plan. So we did it before we were told, because it's the right thing, because we do care about doing something about climate change. and transitioning our energy economy. And doing, and making sure we're doing all that in respect to water quality rules and every other federal and state rule and regulation that exists. We've also been hot on the building housing in our community. We've added 600 or 700 units in a community of 2,100 people in the last 3 or 4 years. Before there was statewide zoning, we did it because it was the right thing to do. A third to a half of those are low and moderate income units. So, you know, we're trying to do the right things because it's good for our community, frankly, and we're moving that along. So just some context about what we're doing. We were created in 1895 specifically to bring power for the first time to our community. And we did that by building hydroelectric dams. It's not an unusual story in Vermont, but it is our story. I share that because our bias is for hydro. Right? It hasn't changed. Our culture's built on it. Our community's built on it. Morrisville wouldn't be the center of that county and the service center, but if that hadn't happened in 1895. So it matters to us. That's why we fight so hard and try to do the right thing around hydro as well. But we don't want to let it go, you know. And so we talked about this study and the notion that the state should own it. It pains us to say that. The last thing in the world we want is to let go of a viable hydro asset because we've been regulated out of existence, which is really what has happened here. Again, really here to talk specifically about section 18 of Bill 319. And on the one hand, I get it, it's an extension of 9 months, but there's actually is a lot of harm done by those 9 months. And while I'm not sure there's a lot you can do about it, I just want you to be aware of the impact that has on us. After 3 years after you first funded that study, only 3 years since you first funded that study, and we'll get into that. The relicensing process began back in 2009 for this dam and the other dams that we have. We have 3 different dams and they go as a package. When all the studies that are required began, by 2016, that turned into a water quality permit, which has been the subject of why we now need you to take it over, because that outside of any law or regulation, that law has gone beyond those to create a new precedent, essentially, which makes it impossible to use that facility. So that's really what we're talking about here. And I just would note that, you know, when I say it goes beyond, like, you know, the Clean Water Act itself is as you probably have heard tons of testimony from more qualified people than me, is a fairly vacuous guidepost that a lot of rules get written within. So when people tell you like the Clean Water Act prohibits us from doing this, most of the time that's not actually true. And it was not true in this case. The Clean Water Act is the same essential Clean Water Act as during the time in the late 90s and early 2000s when I held the office of Secretary of the ANR. So, you know, again, I'm not here to break the rules because I used to defend them. That was my job. I cared deeply about them. There are other things in the way that the rules in Vermont have been interpreted that are the reason we're here. Proof of that it isn't the Clean Water Act is that there's more than 20 states in the nation that still not only allow drawdowns at hydro facilities, they allow pump storage. So they draw down every single day in dramatic ways. And not just if you want to say the bad states, our neighbors in Massachusetts and New York who have a great environmental ethic, in California who have a great environmental ethic, all allow it to. So this notion that you can't have drawdowns, just drawing it down to generate electricity and letting it refill, is not mandated by the Clean Water Act. It's just not factual. So just want to make sure you know there's always room. If we could ever get to a point where we could have that conversation, you wouldn't have to even talk about the study because we wouldn't want to sell it to you. We wouldn't want to give it up. And it doesn't take draconian change to that permit. Negotiated endlessly with the agency to try to find very modest ways that frankly mirror the normal way that with normal weather, the shoreline adjusts, you know, shortly after it rains and then during a drought and you know, essentially the way hydro works is that we can draw down, you know, 13 or 14 times a year and hit the peak. You do tremendous good for everybody. You both avoid massive amounts of carbon dioxide emissions, which is what I'm most worried about. If we have to give this up, we will be contributing much more greenhouse gases to the environment. in return for really no benefit. They were worried about that, so just want to make sure you're aware of that. Again, as I said, we're 3 years into the study, 350 to 500. Over the winter, it went to 580, and because I was worried about that being used as another way to delay the study, when the secretary asked me if I would put some money in, we did. We don't have it, but we put money in to keep the project going. And so it didn't become another reason to wait and come back and ask for more money. To her credit, we split it. I don't know where she found the other 40,000. So not to complain about that, but just it would have become another reason for delay. And I just also want to, like, again, the cost continuing to rise. It's unclear to me why we can sue. On the one hand, this was raised as a safety issue that the state needed to know more before they could talk. If we're mandated by FERC to do a very detailed study every 3 years, which we do. And by the way, people always say it, don't take good care of the dam. We've always passed that inspection by a third-party engineer. We don't get to control them. Every 3 years we pass it. There's a few small things to fix. That's the whole point of the inspection, right? They give you a sense that detailed third-party independent safety inspection costs $32,000 when we finished it in December of 2024. So the state is redoing the study we just did for 20 times more money. Now they're doing much more than that, some of which helps us a lot, and some of which they don't understand why we're doing it, because they're doing economic analysis about them acquiring the dam and then operating. If it could be operated, we wouldn't be selling it. I will tell you that I approach no fewer than 15 people who buy hydro stations around New England who are in that business. They're all very eager to buy hydro. And then they would say, send me all the data and the new permit, and I would do that, and they would say, well, there's no way in hell you can make it go at this step, the way it's been regulated. So they would go away. So they hear the agency say that they might operate it. As I said to one of their staff recently, probably not in a very wonderful way. If you acquire from us and then you change the permit for yourself, I'll meet you in every court in the land. That, I don't think that's what they're suggesting. I don't mean to say that, but in a bit of anger, that is what came out of my mouth, just so you know. So you're getting the frustration. And I guess, the delays have a real impact on us. So as I said, there's one piece of this that's quite important. One of the things the new permit requires is that in the summer, we have absolutely no drawdown. We're supposed to somehow figure out how to have water come in during the drought to keep it exactly stable. And how I'm supposed to do that, that's what the permit says. And we have 0.0 inches of change. In wintertime, it reduces the amount we can draw down for safety purposes to something like a foot or a foot and a half, I forget. And so one of the things they are doing in that study is looking at, because it was never modeled, because it came out in the permit with no real discussion before it, is if that dam, which is absolutely safe today, and I believe the study, when you find the issue, will say that, because ours said it in December. We always have said, we're worried about what happens if you don't let it be drawn down and you put all that ice pressure on the top of that dam, and you may create the circumstance where it craters. So FERC has been waiting for this state study since they're going to look at that. And that's why our FERC permit has not been issued for 3 years. The impact of that on us is, it's one permit for all 3 of our facilities. I can't invest in any of those facilities reasonably when I don't know if the permit's going to go through. And so we continue to wait. In part because of this, we asked FERC to separate the permit, take our other 2 dams, Morrisville and Katie's Falls, and put that into one FERC permit, so we could start investing in those and move forward, because the permit's fine for those 2 dams, and separate Green River into its own, so we could have this discussion. The agency opposed that, it continues to oppose that. So we're just not finding a way forward.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm just confused, I think. Is this the only section of the bill that relates?
Yes, and I'm almost there. I'm sorry it's taking me so long.
No, that's okay. I just don't have any of this background because have not been on this committee. And you have 3 dams.
Yep.
Okay. One of them doesn't work.
One of them works fine, but it can't operate under the permit issued by the Agency of Natural Resources.
Okay, but I thought you said you were trying to sell it to other people and they didn't want it because it didn't work.
Well, it can't work economically, sorry, I should be
Oh.
precise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to keep it basic for me, because I don't know this, I don't know the
The
background.
reason you should.
And so this study is supposed to be a study about whether or not the state should take over
Yeah, so.
one or two or all
Just-
three.
Just the Green River, the point, the reason we asked for the state to consider taking it over from us is. If we can't manage it at the hydroelectric dam, the only two purposes of it left. Are as a flood control dam, which it was originally built for. But our permit doesn't allow us to operate it for flood control purposes, that's why we're supportive of the bill that came through here to give the governor the authority. To override the permit and tell us to draw it down in anticipation of floods. But that's not our job as an electric utility if we're not generating electricity, that would be a good job for the state. And the second is to support the Green River State Park, that's why there is a Green River State Park, is because there's a reservoir. Which is enjoyed by people from all over New England, not just Morrisville, Vermont. So why should the 4,900 ratepayers in Morrisville
Okay,
support a
So you're
dam that
supportive.
only supports the state park?
you would only want to keep the dam if you could draw it down and use it to generate electricity. And if,
Correct.
and if not, your preference is the state take over.
The
But
state
you
park-
don't want that, you would be annoyed, so, to say the least, if the state took it over and then started to use it to generate electricity, because you could have done that.
Correct.
Is that
That's
fair?
very fair.
Okay,
Yep. Yep.
I'm just trying to get to and you're, I'm assuming, not happy with the delay of the report. It seems like it's probably been delayed multiple
We're
times.
like 3 years in and frankly, the way we heard it was going to be delayed was. At a meeting of the Friends of Green River Reservoir, which is the local constituency group. Where the commissioner of DC announced it was going to be delayed 9 months and said, and when asked by a member from the Friends of Green River. About it, his response was, well, we consider deadlines of the legislature for reports advisory. And that was pretty annoying, in the face of all that, so. We continue to work great with the dam safety section, by the way. If there's a silver lining here, those people are amazing at what they do. And so, just to give credit where credit is due. It's not that side where there's a challenge. So really to sum up, really, there's 3 things that I think are worth just putting on the table. One is just, I don't know what you can do about accountability, but again, there's a lot of harm happening from this and. I was secretary, I sat in this chair and had a committee. Hold me to task for being late on studies, many times. And it makes an impact when you do it, it did on me anyway, I'll tell you that, so. I don't know how we can ever get to a point where we can have a rational discussion about permits and such, and I know it's not the legislature's job, but I can tell you the modifications are so small that are necessary. The argument that it somehow violates things is almost laughable. And the example I'll give you is that in the same permit that bans us from drawing down for any reason, there is one exemption. And it's an exemption that we are mandated to do very large drawdowns to allow kayakers to have a joyride down the Green River Reservoir. But that somehow creates no environmental impact at all. So, it's kind of crazy. So if we can allow that, we can allow something much more modest than that. To actually comply with the law you passed last year, the new res, which actually enhanced the value of local small scale hydro. So to me, there's some alignment of these issues that you can pull together. You've passed certain policy and now we're having actions that run counter to that. I actually think it's S41, I can't remember, there's a bill that actually talks about adding local small scale hydro as an intended use. And, that when I asked how the kayak issue was added, it's because kayaking is an intended use of Vermont waters. So I believe that bill, if you attach it to this bill, would solve the issue because we could ask for amendment to the permit as an intended use. We could find a way forward. We wouldn't have to worry about the study. We could just go all about it.
I wonder if having this well, I guess this delay. I mean, January 15th, 25 is already passed.
I know,
And September is
soon.
basically here, right? So, otherwise, I would say, oh, you know, if we could delay enough to take a look at that
Yeah.
more fully, that would be interesting. But
Get it. And I understand that it's 9 months and, you know, I'm here mostly to express frustration. I understand this. Eliminating this, I guess you could take this section out and force the agency to be in non-compliance as a way to hold them accountable. You know, it accomplishes nothing, and believe me, I understand that when I ask you. The real point, and again, I will not say Morrisville, utilities often get accused of dragging feet on these permits. When I was secretary, I sat on the other side, they do that. Morrisville did that as part of this process, so I'm not here telling you that Morrisville's hands are perfectly clean through the 16-year history of this thing. They are not. We are trying really hard to do all the right things. And, you know, local hydro, we should want more local hydro in the state, not in replacement of solar and all of the other things that we have, but because it's essentially base load power, which is vital to making this whole system operate well when we have so much variable in power on our system. So I'll happy to answer questions, really just thank you, but just wanted to come and share the story.
great. This is nice.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is a question for you, but, or maybe for Mike, but after the study is hopefully completed. Does A&R have the authority to take action on the study without coming back to the legislature, or
The study comes to you.
it comes
And
to
you
us?
can't do
So
anything with it till next
they
year.
can't just say we concluded X and go ahead and do X without us, okay?
So nothing will happen until next January at the earliest.
So there is still a world where they could say, oh, this dam can function and we should create hydro, and Morrisville Light and Power should get a permit to be able to do that. That's still a possibility. It's
We've
just,
been engaged in negotiations on that front for the entire 3 years I've been at Marshall Water.
got it, okay.
And in the meanwhile, sounds like part of the harm that you are recognizing is that you are feeling like you can't put investment into the dam until you know if it's gonna continue to be your asset,
Correct,
or not,
correct.
right?
And yet, because we just had our FERC inspection, we had to spend some money on Green River, because again, as I said, every 3 years there's a bond to us. FERC is not willing to wait for their initial permit, even though that we're waiting on their permit. They are very insistent that you get it done within 90 days, which we have already done. So,
I'd love to chat more.
yeah, Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you for the
Appreciate
time.
you.
Really, I realize this is like the smallest of small things in this bill. And sorry to take your time on it, but
No, it's,
that's frustrating.
it is, and it's good to know, to have that background, so thank you so much.
Thank you all. Appreciate all you do for us.
Okay, so, Mr. Grady, you need to leave, is that correct? You have to go,
I do.
okay, so I think we're gonna,
I do wanna say that issue is a lot more complicated than what was communicated to you.
okay, there's a lot there,
There's a lot more there.
okay,
A lot more there.
okay. All right, well, we'll,
Hopefully get the study, you know,
Yeah.
explain me a lot more there.
yeah. I'd love to chat more about this as an issue, offline, I suppose. Okay, we're gonna switch back to, S 124. If, Mr. Carpenter, if you
Yes.
join us,
Might sneak by first. Yeah, thanks.
I actually, we can hold for 1 second here. Ms. Holiday, you're here for 319.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe we, as long as we're on 319, can we pause? Let's do,
Yeah.
because we'll,
Make it be quick.
yeah, if we can jump into that, that would be great. And see, I wanted to make sure that you had, I think, a small suggestion.
Yeah.
Yes, so welcome. And I realized, Jude, that this holiday is also not on our agenda, but she's here, so, we're just checking things off right now, so, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So this is concerns the HHWPR changes that are in 319. And when I testified last week, I spoke to the performance metric in the law that currently has the number of the percentage of household participation required by the producers to have for HHW collection. Currently in the law, it is 5%. I checked in with ANR and the most recent participation rates in 2023 that I have is 7%. And so the purpose, one of the purposes of a PPR law is to collect the material and put it out as a waste stream. And so it doesn't really make sense to have a performance goal to be lower than what's actually happening on the ground today. So I would, the year before the 2022 participation rate was 6%. So I would say 6% would be very safe. To have that as a participation rate, 7% is the most recent.
Okay, so, and just to clarify, so I assume you're talking about page 16, line 5, where it says 5% right now, you think that would be, it would be safe to make that 6%? Okay.
We don't want to make it raise the bar even more, so that
It's 7. Did you guys
They
say?
can get to 7, shouldn't we say 7?
I think that would be fun.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to go to 7. It's make sure I flag this as potential change. Okay, and that's it. Okay, thank you. Okay, and I know we had 319 on our agenda. We are going to transition back to 124. So checking in. Okay, all right, Mr. Carpenter.
We'd like a room clear first.
Oh,
Chair,
sure.
for sitting down, are you all staying for 2?
Okay, great. Okay. Welcome, and we'll go back to 124, and I do have hard copies of your suggestions
Yes.
to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also posted. So. Derek Carpenter, the Champlain Committee, thank you for having me back. Flying solo today, Scott from CLF and John from BNRC, both, I believe, up in House Judiciary on Lincoln Farm, so it's split duties these days. But we did put together some suggestions. There is, if you look at the version that's posted and sent around, there's a air quotes clean version, on the first page going into the second. And then there's a strike through version, to give the context, on the second going into third page. I would, just because of, so folks can see the changes, I'm going to look at the strike through versions. And not really do as much of a line by line, because some of it's very self-explanatory, but I can provide some of our thinking. So section A, down the last full sentence, in addition to stakeholder engagement process, we expanded that out, so it still includes livestock farmers, farm groups, agricultural consultants, but now has been expanded to include the environmental community just generally, which would include watershed groups and water quality experts. Watershed groups could be, my thoughts would be folks like Kent's group, Friends of the Northern Lake Champlain, which has done a lot of work with the agricultural community and some others as well, to help get a perspective on this, whether or not those meetings are held together or in parallel, as Senator Hardy mentioned. That would be fine as well. So we have a broader input on this process. And how to transition over to a CAFO program. And we did narrow down the factors that the committee would look at. Well, really the first two more specifically. So implementation of an agency natural resources capable program is fairly broad. We focused it down to the establishment of a water quality permitting program administered by ANR. That would be under the Clean Water Act's capable permit requirements. I think that better lines up with the current language in the remainder of the bill that you just walked through, which is very, CAFO oriented. Similarly with number two, agricultural water quality programs, how they would sort of effectively work with AFM's program, which is also enumerated in the bill. Same thing with number three, whether or not a two-agency regulatory system or a full transfer of regulatory authority over water quality on farms over to the Agency of Natural Resources, or keeping it as sort of a two-agency regulatory system, which we discussed and looked into. Then I think it's important, that resources and technical assistance, regulatory structure, how do you implement this? It's one thing to talk about, the transition over to a CAFO program, but I also think it would be helpful if the group discuss the resources that would be available, what would be needed, and the structure in order to create a path for compliance. So let's not just do discussing on how the permitting comes about, but let's do a discussion on how it's implemented and how to help farmers get to that point. Last one, number 5, hasn't changed at all. That's as you discussed, New York State runs a CAFO program completely under their Department of Environmental Protection. Actually, I think their agency of agriculture is also under their agency of natural resources, one umbrella rather than a separate agency, but that's sort of neither here nor there. The only change is in number 3, and assess whether regulatory structure for administering ag water quality requirements in the state is sufficient to ensure that water pollution is controlled consistent with the Clean Water Act. So they will report back, finding whether or not this regulatory structure is going to accomplish what we hope it's going to accomplish and think it's going to accomplish. To ensure compliance with the Clean Water Act and regulation of the water quality in farms. So fair amounts of word changes, but we try to focus it a bit more as to what the group would meet and talk about and come back and report to this body.
I feel like I need time to digest this. So one possibility is that, I kind of need to go back through this and just think about how it is changing things. And we could do that right now. What is another possibility is that we could actually take a break, digest this on our own, get up, move around, do what you need to do. We could come back to talk about this, but I'm also happy to just go back through this because I need to do that one more time. Like that was.
It's a lot, and we haven't sent a copy to Michael Grady for his opinion. There's obviously third parties, so to speak.
And this is language that is just coming from the water quality advocates, not necessarily. You haven't vetted this with ANR or
There has been a little bit, I don't know if Catherine's had a chance to look at it, but I think they might have some suggestions, but nothing that I was able to sort of digest and incorporate in the topics.
Do you all have a preference, team? Do you want to take a break, digest this? Would you like to ask more questions right now?
I think I need time to go through it and figure out,
Okay, I think that's also about it. Yeah, I agree. So let's take, just to check in, we have our next witness at 11, that's Steve Collier. Talking about the same well, it's not necessarily a stakeholder group, but talking about this bill. I think we could take 15 or 10, let's aim for 10 minutes. And then take some time, digest it, do what you need to do, and then we'll come back. Does that sound right?
Thank you.
Okay. Very good.
Senator Watson, can
Yes.
you hit the mute button on a little iPad
Yes,
while you
again.
take?
Sounds good.
When you're ready to start again, Senator Watson, you need to turn the sound on. Can't hear you. Sound is off.
Our thoughts. Okay. Okay, this is Senate Natural Resources and Energy coming back from a break. Jude, can you hear us?
Yes, it sounds great.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right, so we did just have some new language presented by Mr. Carpenter. And while we don't have our legislative council here, I think it's worth still talking through some of the suggestions made here and what we want to do about them, and then we can relay that to legislative council, because I would love to get that information to him so that we can have a draft that's ready to go ideally for tomorrow. Okay. So just walking through some of this, actually, you know what I may do to kick us off, Ms. Jessing, would you like to come speak to any of this? If you don't want to, that's okay, we can talk through it ourselves. But you're welcome to if you'd like.
Sure.
I got your copy right there for you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Catherine Gaffney, the counsel for the Agency of Natural Resources. Thank you for having me here today. In going through this language under section 9A, it's an introduction, and at the end of that paragraph, there's a reference to the public as part of the stakeholder process. In general, the stakeholder processes that I've participated in have been not necessarily public in the sense that we have had a number of folks that are involved in it, and we convene meetings. Public might be allowed to, if the public is interested, they can come to those meetings, but we don't encourage them to participate because sometimes it gets very unwieldy. We will take public comments. So I'm just a little concerned that the inclusion of the public in general will make the stakeholder process a little less functional. One of the things that we want to be able to have is the flexibility to speak with all the different stakeholders and have them speak freely with us about what their concerns are. And sometimes in a big public forum, that is more difficult for whatever reason. I think the changes to one from the agency's perspective are.
Before we move on to that, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So do you see this language as giving you the ability to have the separation of like the kinds of groups or arrangements for feedback that you would like to have?
I'm just not sure, because I haven't seen like the inclusion of the public in a stakeholder process before.
Sorry, let me back up. If we took out, yeah, so the public would have a right to comment through the rulemaking process when we get to that anyway. And this is not the rulemaking process, so it's not like the public is left out. Particularly, it's just that we're trying to get feedback from a specific group in this section, so we could take out the public, and if from this, knowing that they'll be included elsewhere, you know, along the rulemaking process. So given that, do you feel like there's enough space to have people be able to speak freely?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, there would be, just to build on what you just said, there would be a public process associated with any of the permits that we promulgate. And the rules and also the procedures and guidelines that we're probably going to have to implement as part of this program. And we would try to engage the public in that, in those processes too. I mean, we really do care about public input. It's just that sometimes when you're dealing with this kind of, you know, specific type of topic, it's more helpful to kind of at least have that core group come up with the standards and then put it out to the public, if that makes sense.
Senator Hardy.
Yeah, and I think, to your question about the subgroups, I think we should add, and maybe Michael can come up with the right language, the ability to that they have, that ANR and ag have the ability to have subgroups meet separately, so the water quality advocates could meet and the ag people could meet, and then they could get together, and so that it doesn't have to be every single meeting is all of the stakeholders, so that people can speak freely amongst their groups and then come together and find common ground. And probably this allows that, but it might be helpful to be explicit, to allow some group meetings in some way.
Okay, great, that sounds good to me, others, I assume you all are good with that? Okay. Speak up here. Okay, go ahead.
I think 1 and 2 are essentially saying the same thing, it's just different words.
Okay.
3, our suggestion would be to change the language to say after and consistency with the Clean Water Act and sort of cross out the effective control, blah, blah, blah.
Sorry, I need to catch up. Oh, and's at the end of the sentence or end of that line.
Yeah, it's the next line down.
So, sorry, can you say that again? You would strike out what now?
I would strike out effective control of water pollution consistent and say and consistency with the Clean Water Act.
You could just say that is consistent with the Clean Water Act.
Yeah. And I almost would just cross out the rest of it, but I think we're fine with 4. Agency is. We would suggest that under B3 that the original language be kept.
For 3.
B3,
So
on
the
page 3.
3.
But and that's it.
So I need to process that. Is this is in the report. So there's sure water pollution control. Just to push back a little bit on that one, I guess I would say I don't mind a reference here to the Clean Water Act, since that's sort of like the reason we're doing this.
But maybe only one needs to be there.
Yeah,
What I would suggest is to the first sufficient to ensure that water pollution is controlled consistent with the Clean Water Act or whether, and then just cross out in further
in order to ensure, it's like, it doesn't
Mhm.
need to be in there twice.
Mhm.
So just for whether sole regulation by the Agency of Natural Resources.
Yeah,
Over water quality
Yeah.
on farm should be
yeah,
mentioned, just a second.
okay, so keep that first line of to ensure that first change to ensure that water pollution is controlled, consistent with clean water.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall it's too many words, but if we're gonna get rid of some words, just
Yeah.
get rid of that.
Okay. Okay, that,
So exactly what was supposed to use?
it, if I understand it,
Yeah,
it is, so it would, three, its entirety would read, assess whether the regulatory structure for administrating agricultural water quality requirements and say is sufficient to ensure that water pollution is controlled consistent with the Clean Water Act, or whether, and then we're gonna skip a whole bunch, or whether sole regulation by the Agency of Natural Resources over water quality on farms should be implemented. And et cetera, et cetera. Okay.
just,
Yeah.
one thing that I think, this, the whole bill is about CAFOs, and then this kind of makes it broader. So I think at least in some instances, we want to make sure that we're focusing on CAFOs, because it could just get to be too broad. We don't give them very much time to do the stakeholder group, and if we're asking them to talk about a whole ton of things, then I think it might get overwhelming. So I would say that, that, in the first paragraph on A, regarding the implementation of and transition to a CAFO program that conforms with the requirements of the Clean Water Act. Because that's what this transition is right now. And then there's later some language about other things, but really the focus is the CAFO program. And then under 1, the establishment of a CAFO water permitting program administered by the secretary instead of water quality permitting. It's really, I can show you my more detailed changes that I think would be that narrow, keep it narrow enough that they could maybe do this work.
I want to go back to your first suggestion,
Yeah.
in the paragraph above, because the suggestion here had struck a reference to CAFOs. But
Right.
could you just say what you had suggested again?
Well, either keep the same one, engage key stakeholders as part of a pre-rulemaking process to gather input on proposed CAFO rules. I think that would be fine to just stay with what originally it said and not include any of the changes that are suggested there. Or to say shall engage key stakeholders regarding the implementation and transition to a CAFO program that conforms with the requirements of the Clean Water Act. And I have this here.
Yeah, I like that version. Because again, I like the reference to the Clean Water Act and.
Yeah, I think that's fine, I just
Okay,
wanted to keep it
yeah,
focused, otherwise they might just.
if you have that, I mean,
Yeah, I can give you
Yes,
this
but if you
that I've
have-
written on,
Yeah.
Senator Watson, and then I, again, in 1, so A1. I say that they cross out the implementation of the CAFO program, and I think that's fine, it could be the establishment of a CAFO permitting program administered by the Secretary of Natural Resources that ensures compliance with the Clean Water Act's CAFO permit requirements. And again, I have this written down, so, and then number 2. Again, how to align the CAFO program, so they crossed out CAFO. Most effectively with programs administered by the Secretary of Ag to facilitate compliance with Clean Water Act statement as requirements. So just making sure that this stakeholder group remains focused on the thing. And then there later ones ask broader questions, which is fine, but the whole point is to make sure that the CAPO program is implemented and followed well, and that stakeholders are involved in that process.
Mr. Carpenter, do you have any thoughts?
So, Madam Chair, that all makes sense to me. It's, it's the same intent. Obviously, we're wordsmithing on the fly here, so there's a few things that, for example, and the public, I don't think we ever intended to go through a full public comment process about this study group. There will be plenty of opportunities for that further along. I think it was just the intent of including, a broader community like is listed in the other organizations, and Senator Harvey's changes, they make sense as well. I mean, that's, the intent is still there.
Okay,
So it sounds good.
okay, any other thoughts on this? Great, thank you all for your time and attention to this, it's great. It's good to have some agreement about that. Mr. Collier. Welcome.
Morning, thank you.
Hey, you've already had a busy morning, I thank you.
You can quite remember what I'm doing. It's good to see you all. Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. So really appreciate your effort to continue the momentum on this bill. I have to cross over, appreciate your thoughtful consideration of it. I thought John Grodman said something that was really important yesterday, and I appreciated his candor, and I'd like to just chat about that a bit, because we can continue on the path we've always been, or we can open a new playbook. And the thing that he said that I thought was important is they've been trying to do this for 20 years. And to do this, they've been trying to get the water quality enforcement away from the Agency of Agriculture to the Agency of Natural Resources. That's perfectly legitimate position for them to take. They've been trying for 20 years. They continue to try. The more interesting question to me is the why. Why are they? My understanding is they want it because they don't think that we issue big enough, our agency issues big enough penalties. They think that farmers need to be punished a lot more for when there's an infraction. That's a legitimate policy position to take. It's not one that we share, but I would rather have that policy discussion rather than talking about who does what. And my only concern with where, I appreciate that comment, and I understand that they're kind of backing off from their original request, which were in 146, so that we can have this discussion again next year. And then if we don't get it done next year, then they have a discussion again next year, and that's fine. That's perfectly legitimate. But I just wonder if there's a different universe, and I've made this plea directly in the past, where instead of talking around issues and talking sort of ignoring one another, we could just talk about what we really want to accomplish, which I think is clean water, and also to enforce against farmers in a pragmatic and possible way. And I guess where my confusion lies, what makes it frustrating from our perspective is farmers are doing work. I mean, I could see the push if farmers weren't getting it done, but we've lost approximately 1,000 farms since this non-point source pollution control program originated. Lost about half of our remaining farms since the Clean Water Act in 2016. I'm not blaming the losses of the farm on those revisions, but they are additional costs. And what farmers struggle with most is managing their costs. The cost of production are often higher than the money they get back. And the result is we're losing, and have been for 100 years, but won't be more dramatically recently. We just keep losing our farms and our farmland. So unless preserving those farms takes on the same importance as regulating the farms, there's only one way this goes. And that's we end up with maybe 50 or 100 big farms, no little farms, because they can't afford to do it. And that's where we're headed as a state. And there's a lot of factors in that. But one of the factors is the cost of production and the amount of regulation. And we could hit farms, on every Clean Water Act violation or an hour authority for our agency's program, we can issue an $85,000 penalty for every violation. And if it continues past a day, we can add another $42,500 per day. for that violation. So we could absolutely hammer farmers, no question, we could drive them right out of business easily. That's not the approach we've taken. You know, we've taken the approach that we don't want pollution. So we want farmers to use their resources to fix the problem. And we do penalize them, but our penalties, sometimes they go to the Attorney General's office and they're big. Most of the time, they're under $10,000. Most of the time, they're in that realm. There's no specific playbook for what's enough. But if you have a good understanding about farmers' financial situation and the tight margins they have and how highly leveraged they are, it's probably not wise to treat them like Vermont Yankee or a wastewater treatment company. I mean, the same permitting requirements apply arguably under the Clean Water Act, but we're trying to balance like how do we keep farms viable and how do we also protect the water? That's figuring out how to do that. I don't think that those interests conflict. I don't think that we can't work together with the environmental advocates to think about the most pragmatic, cost-effective measures to do that. But farms, you know, since the Clean Water Act passed and since the TMDL has been adopted, farms are responsible most years for 90% of the phosphorus reductions, in all years, more than 80% of phosphorus reductions. And it's the most cost-effective investment we have as a state, because we've got about 25% of the investments going towards those huge gains. There's more to be done, but why aren't those gains celebrated or at least acknowledged? Why is it that when we're actually doing what we set out to do, why is there a continued push to do more, do it differently, and specifically, why bigger penalties? I mean, is the objective to drive farms out? Is it a deterrent? I mean, I don't think it takes that much of a deterrent, of a penalty amount to be a deterrent for farms. And you know what? If you don't have money, you're not gonna pay it anyway. And so then we just have to go to court. Yes, that's good.
Yeah, so I think where we're at with this bill, first of all, I think that we have acknowledged the progress that farmers have made. I am super proud of the farms in my district that have made huge strides in water quality improvements. And the reason that we're doing this bill is because we're being required by the EPA to change the way that we're regulating CAFOs. And so I hear you about like, hey, let's all work together. That would be awesome. If you have specific suggestions for language in the bill right now, because we're kind of at the last, that would be really helpful. Because we're trying to get this out and move it over to the House so they can work on it. And yeah, do you have specific suggestions?
I do, and I understood on that point, and the reason I'm raising this is not just for committee members, it's for the environmental advocates, because I've made the plea directly before. I'd like to make it again, and my door's open. Like, if we can talk about ways to do a better job, then let's do it. And let's stop just talking at odds. And so that's the plea, and I think
This is a way to do it, so.
well, and the stakeholder group is part of that, and that's what I'm saying, is like, we can keep fighting about this the next 20 years, or we can actually just get on the same page. And I think it'd be wonderful. I know farmers would appreciate it, and our employees would appreciate it. Our employees go out there working extremely hard every day and do a very difficult job regulating people. And farmers would very much enjoy that interaction for the most part, not always. And they just always feel like they're being attacked for doing a good job. So we can keep doing this dance, or we can actually get on the same page. And farmers, I know, would be just unbelievably appreciative to think that the environmental groups in the state are actually working in their interest too, while also moving for stricter regulations. So I think there's a way. I'm not just talking about our agencies, I'm talking about the state of Vermont. We're losing farming. So either we're gonna address that or not. And so it's a big, I'm sorry to take your time for that, but it's just, I appreciated what John Brogan said, and I thought it cut to the crux of what this is really about. It's not really about the EPA Clean Water Act. That's a vehicle for this discussion, but that's not what underlies it. So the thing that the reason I asked to chat with you all is I've heard, just listening to the committee, that there's been some discussion about whether to use the waters of the United States, the federal definition, or the state waters definition. If that's not on, if you're wanting to use the federal definition, I don't need to say anything. If that's still up for discussion, I wanted to explain the administration's position and why we prefer the federal definition. So is that something that would be useful to you, or?
Well, so that is something that we have talked a fair bit about. It would be good to know what your position is and why.
Yeah.
Though I it is part of the discussion that we've already had, but would love for you to be on record as to what you want.
Yeah, sure, thank you.
Mhm.
So we do want the, the position is we'd like you to please use the federal, waters of the US definition, and there's many reasons for that. First and foremost, this is all about Federal Clean Water Act. And the only question that S-124 or S-100 addresses is ANR's enforcement of the Federal Clean Water Act. The Federal Clean Water Act is defined by federal law. And so to use a state law definition that's different, it blurs the line between federal and state law, and there's no reason to do that. More importantly, and there could be a reason in other programs where ANR operates state and the federal law, makes sense. But in this case, 20 years ago, the legislature decided to assign the state law enforcement to the Agency of Agriculture and the federal law enforcement to ANR. So state waters are already covered by our agents. That's our job. And we use that state waters definition. So the reason that we're having this discussion is about federal law. And federal waters are different, mostly they're the same, but there are differences between federal and state waters. And so from our perspective, what we need is for everyone to have clarity, that includes farmers, so that they know whether federal law applies or whether state law applies, so that our agencies, when we're working together, and know who's responsible for what. And when we already do the state water definition, and that's our mandate, and ANR has to do the federal law definition, blurring those lines just creates confusion and legal confusion. And it also makes it tricky to interpret precedent. So there's a lot of body of precedent out there that defines what you have to do in the Clean Water Act. That's based on federal law, because the federal law the Clean Water Act is federal law. You start blurring those things, and to me, it gets very confusing. Most importantly, there's zero gaps. State law is covered, federal law is covered. So why blur them to make some federal, some state over here? And that it's not just that state law is more comprehensive. It is more comprehensive in many ways. It's also narrower in some ways. So federal law includes the federal clean waters in the United States includes wetlands that are that are connected to nearby surface waters. State law does not. So that's a difference where federal law is actually broader, where it's protecting wetlands for discharges. State law is broader on things like artificial ponds. So you can have a farm could have build a farm pond on their own land, and that would be a water under the state water definition. If it's not connected to other surface water, it's not water under the federal law definition. So if you use the state water definition for the Federal Clean Water Act, you could be requiring a farm to get a discharge permit because they're polluting their own farm pond. And that just, it seems silly, but also even more importantly, there's some important distinctions between the Federal Clean Water Act and the state non-point source pollution, a state non-point law, and that's a private right of action. So under the Federal Clean Water Act, individual plaintiffs or organizations can bring a suit against the farm for violations of that. They can bring a suit against the overseeing administrator or against the farm. So to potentially expand the coverage of that private right of action, say like if someone could sue a farm for polluting their own farm pond, I'm not saying that would happen, but why expand the definition in a way that's sort of nonsensical? The Clean Water Act protects federal waters, which is almost all waters, but it's not constructed farms. It doesn't have any connection to surface water. So if we're talking about clarity, which everybody wants, both of our agencies want, the administration want, farmers want, the environmental groups want, everybody wants clarity. Why blur that line? It just logically as a lawyer, if I'm trying to interpret two different frameworks, I want clear jurisdictional lines. In a way, the whole point of the Federal Clean Water Act is to prevent discharges to waters of the United States. So that's just that's the line. It makes the logical and legal sense. If state waters weren't protected, it would make sense to expand that. But you've already done that. You did that 20 years ago. That's what we did. We're on farms protecting. We use the state water definition. We also protect groundwater. We're much broader than the Federal Clean Water Act. So
yes, good.
So I think your example about the farm pond is kind of a red herring. That wouldn't happen because those are created specifically to meet the requirements of the RAPs, so that there can be discharge.
I'm not talking about a manure pond, I'm talking about a pond,
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
I
pond.
thought you were talking about manure pond.
no.
But it seems to me that having the same definitions of water for the two does provide clarity, because if they are meeting the requirements of the required ag practices and the non-point discharge, then they should be also meeting the requirements of the CAFO and wouldn't. If there's no discharge under the RAPs, and you yourself testified to this earlier, there's no discharge under the RAPs, then there's probably not discharge that would require a CAFO permit, so they're actually more consistent if we use the same definition of water. And with the federal definition of water changing so frequently, that provides, you know, a lack of clarity for farmers. So if they know, okay, this is the same water I gotta protect over here and over here, it's the same thing, and it's not gonna change. It seems to me that that is more consistent for them and provides more clarity. So they already have to meet that.
Well, I would just say that what's consistent for every farm in the state of Vermont right now is that the Agency of Agriculture is regulating them. So the only thing the CAFO permit does is it changes that whole rubric for them. And it's equivalent, they're equivalent standards, but it changes their whole dynamic. So the question is, should we be changing that more broadly than federal law requires? Or should we be changing it consistent with federal law? Because that's the only thing EPA is concerned about and has a right to be. Is the state of Vermont properly implementing federal law? We've already done way more than federal law does.
Right.
So why shift to a federal discharge permit for something that's not a federal law? I guess that's.
But you testified earlier, that if they are meeting the requirements of the RAPs and don't have a discharge, then they probably won't need a CAFO permit because they will already have no discharge.
Right.
And so it seems to me that that is consistent with the two definitions of water. They're not discharging over here, they're not gonna be discharging over here because it's the same water. So
If there's no discharge, I totally agree with you. It's when there is a discharge that there's a difference. So if there's no discharge, you don't need to. Under any standard, you don't need a CAFO permit.
right,
But my question is, why use water discharge to create a federal discharge permit for a water that's not a federal water? And I don't think the definitions are largely the same, but the waters of the United States has a litany of things. It's more navigable waters. It's all streams and rivers and everything that's connected to something else, but it doesn't include, isolated ponds that don't have any surface level connection. I think that's the most likely crossover. So if you got a pond that doesn't have any other, and a lot of ponds do have a broader surface water connection, but if you've got a pond that doesn't, that's not a federal water. Why create a discharge permit for a pond that's not a federal water? Is that I just don't see why ship the farm to a federal CAFO permit where they can be sued by their neighbor and the Clean Water Act because they're discharging to a pond that's not federal water. It's true, we have, all of our regulations are designed to prevent discharges to state water. So that doesn't mean that wouldn't be addressed. It just wouldn't require being shifted to a federal discharge permit.
So, I mean, the logic that's resonating with me as well here is that because that definition keeps changing. And consistency and clarity, I think, is easier to deal with. And you are probably aware of this, but just to make sure, we did change the definition of waters to be inclusive of the federal definition, so it's state waters and waters of the United States. So it should be encompassing all of, even if there's a change.
And that makes sense, but that applies to all of ANR's programs where there isn't a sister agency doing all of the state water enforcement. That makes perfect sense because you can't run a federal program when you don't include federal waters. So changing state waters to make it clear that federal is included in that makes sense for all their other programs.
Mhm.
But under a KFO program, they're required to minister the federal, and in terms of the definition changing, I get that,
Mhm.
but it doesn't matter. I mean, that's the requirement is that you have to implement it according to federal law. So if you're not paying attention to what the waters of the United States definition means, you're not following federal law. And that doesn't mean it won't be tricky and confusing. But if it changes, you have to be aware of that. Now, that doesn't mean farms are gonna be flipping back and forth. The way it's defined is, and under state law in this proposal, is if the farm has a CAFO permit, that'd be for a 5-year term. So that once you have the trigger to get in there, we're gonna be in there for 5 years. After that, they can try to move out if they're not discharging. And if not, they just stay the same. So it's not gonna be this flipping back and forth, but why change? Because this is every CAFO permit that happens is gonna be a change. So right now, farms are covered, they're doing the work. If you want to change them, but because it's required under federal law, of course, that's required under federal law. But blurring those lines does not create clarity, it creates jurisdictional confusion. And our consensus.
Okay. Thank you, for helping us, see that, so thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Yeah, okay, any questions for Mr. Collier? Okay. All right, speakers, so I think we are otherwise done. Any thoughts anybody wants to say before we are done for the day? So just in terms of next steps, we get these suggestions over to legislative council, so we can have a draft. We can hopefully vote tomorrow, and we will also be looking at 319 tomorrow as well. Okay, I think that's it.